In the grey expanse of the North Sea, under the heavy sky of May 1916, two naval superpowers were preparing for a confrontation that would define the destiny of the world's oceans. The Battle of Jutland would represent the zenith of traditional naval warfare, the last great duel between dreadnought fleets the world would ever witness. This colossal engagement between the British Royal Navy and the German High Seas Fleet transcended its immediate tactical importance, becoming a decisive landmark that would shape naval strategies for the following decades and profoundly influence the course of world geopolitics. The context that led to this epic confrontation was rooted in the naval arms race that had dominated the 2 decades prior to the world conflict. Germany, emerging as a formidable industrial power under the command of Kaiser Wilhelm II, had challenged British maritime supremacy through an ambitious and methodically executed naval program. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, architect of this strategic transformation, had conceived a revolutionary naval theory that advocated for the construction of a fleet powerful enough to deter any direct confrontation with the Royal Navy, forcing London to recognize German claims to continental European dominance. This policy of calculated risk had produced impressive results. In 2 decades, the Imperial German Navy had transformed from a modest coastal force into a world-class second-tier oceanic fleet, surpassing traditional naval powers such as France and Russia. German shipyards, driven by naval engineering excellence and substantial financial resources, produced a succession of battleships and battle cruisers that rivaled the best British designs in technology, armor, and firepower. The quality of German metallurgy, particularly in the development of naval guns and fire control systems, had set new standards of precision and range that challenged the maritime experience accumulated by Great Britain over centuries. The British response to this emerging threat materialized in an unprecedented technological revolution in shipbuilding. The launch of HMS Dreadnought in 1906 represented an evolutionary leap that rendered all previous battleships obsolete, establishing a new paradigm of naval supremacy based on large-caliber guns, superior speed, and optimized armor. This radical innovation had, paradoxically, temporarily leveled the naval competition, allowing Germany to compete on more equitable terms in a renewed arms race. Admiral John Fisher, the visionary behind this transformation, understood that maintaining British naval supremacy required not only numerical superiority, but constant technological advantage and tactical doctrine adapted to the realities of modern warfare. The outbreak of the First World War in August 1914 had put these rival naval theories to the definitive test. Contrary to expectations on both sides, the decisive confrontation between the main fleets had been slow to materialize. The German strategy of unrestricted submarine warfare and quick raids against the British coast aimed to fragment the Grand Fleet and create opportunities for engagements under more favorable conditions. Admiral Reinhard Scheer, commander of the High Seas Fleet, had developed a sophisticated tactical doctrine that exploited the peculiar geography of the North Sea and the limitations imposed by the distance between German and British naval bases. Preliminary operations had demonstrated both the potential and the vulnerabilities of both fleets. The German bombardments of Scarborough, Hartlepool, and Whitby in December 1914 exposed the British inability to adequately protect their eastern coast, forcing a strategic reorganization that redistributed substantial naval resources. Simultaneously, the loss of German cruisers at the Battle of Heligoland Bight and the growing restrictions imposed by the British naval blockade demonstrated that the window of opportunity for a decisive German victory was rapidly narrowing. Time unequivocally favored Great Britain, whose industrial superiority and control of global sea lanes guaranteed increasing advantages in a prolonged war. The strategic situation in May 1916 was characterized by a precarious balance that neither belligerent power considered sustainable in the long term. The High Seas Fleet, composed of 16 modern battleships and 5 battle cruisers, represented a formidable force that, although numerically inferior to the British Grand Fleet, possessed significant qualitative advantages in some crucial aspects. German naval engineering had produced ships with superior compartmentalization, more efficient damage control systems, and ammunition with optimized ballistic characteristics. These factors, combined with intensive training and innovative tactical doctrine, gave the German Navy confidence in the possibility of achieving a strategic victory through carefully planned engagements. On the other hand, the British Grand Fleet, anchored at the fortified naval base of Scapa Flow, maintained a considerable numerical superiority with 28 battleships and 10 battle cruisers when at maximum strength. This quantitative advantage, backed by centuries of naval experience and mastery of oceanic navigation techniques, constituted the foundation upon which rested the blockade strategy that was gradually strangling the German economy. Admiral John Jellicoe, commander of the Grand Fleet, faced the complex challenge of preserving this superiority while maintaining constant pressure on German lines of communication, balancing strategic prudence with the need for tactical decision when the opportunity presented itself. The evolution of naval doctrines reflected the realities imposed by technological innovations that had radically transformed the nature of maritime warfare. The development of wireless communication systems, although still primitive by later standards, allowed for coordination between dispersed units on an unprecedented scale. Simultaneously, the refinement of fire control systems, particularly the pioneering developments of Arthur Pollen and Freddie Dreyer, had revolutionized the accuracy of naval bombardment at long distances. These technical innovations, combined with improvements in metallurgy that allowed for larger caliber and range guns, set the stage for naval confrontations of intensity and scale never before experienced. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only the material and numerical superiority of the rival fleets, but also the validity of the naval doctrines that had guided 2 decades of intensive preparation. The Battle of Jutland would emerge from this context as the last great duel of the dreadnought era, an epic confrontation that would seal the fate of world maritime dominance and establish strategic precedents whose consequences would extend far beyond the temporal horizon of the war itself. The second movement of this naval symphony began to take shape in the early hours of May 31, 1916, when the first units of the German High Seas Fleet began their sortie from the bases of Wilhelmshaven and Jade. The operation, designated by the German Code as an undertaking intended to attract and destroy an isolated portion of the British Grand Fleet, represented the materialization of months of meticulous planning and tactical preparation. Admiral Scheer had conceived an ingenious plan that exploited perceived vulnerabilities in the British strategic disposition, specifically targeting Admiral Beatty's battlecruisers based in Rosyth, geographically separated from the main body of the Grand Fleet in Scapa Flow. German naval intelligence had identified British operational patterns that suggested the possibility of intercepting and annihilating the battlecruiser force before it could receive substantial reinforcements from the main force. This analysis was based on a sophisticated understanding of the limitations imposed by the geography of the North Sea and the operational characteristics of the different types of ships involved. The German battlecruisers of the 1st Reconnaissance Group, commanded by Admiral Franz von Hipper, would serve as bait to lure Beatty into a chase that would lead him directly to the German battle line, where local numerical superiority would allow for the destruction of a significant portion of the British naval force. This naval ambush strategy reflected a deep understanding of the tactical realities of modern maritime warfare. The superior speed of the German battlecruisers, combined with their sustained firing capacity and resistance to damage, created the ideal conditions to draw the British into a carefully prepared trap. The timing of the operation had been calculated to maximize the chances of success, taking advantage of favorable weather conditions and recent intelligence on the movements of the British fleet. The coordination between different elements of the German force demonstrated a level of operational planning that rivaled the best examples of Prussian military doctrine applied to the maritime domain. The initial execution of the operation proceeded according to German expectations. The 1st Reconnaissance Group, composed of the battlecruisers Lützow, Derfflinger, Seydlitz, Moltke, and von der Tann, sailed in impeccable formation through the German coastal waters, heading for the predetermined position off the coast of Jutland. These ships represented the height of German naval engineering, incorporating lessons learned in previous confrontations and technical refinements that made them formidable adversaries for any contemporary naval force. The crews of these steel giants had been trained intensively in the preceding months, developing a level of proficiency in tactical maneuvers and fire control that complemented the technical advantages incorporated into the ship's design. In parallel, the main body of the High Seas Fleet, led by the battleship Friedrich der Grosse, followed a carefully planned route that would initially keep it out of visual range of British reconnaissance forces. This formation included some of the most modern and powerful warships in the world, each representing millions of German marks in technological and industrial investment. The battleships of the König and Kaiser classes incorporated the latest developments in armor, propulsion, and armament, giving the German battle line a combat capability that, although numerically inferior to the maximum British concentration, possessed substantial qualitative advantages in close combat. The coordination of this complex operation required precise communication and rigorous temporal synchronization. German advances in wireless communication technology, although still vulnerable to interception and interference, allowed for a level of operational control that would have been impossible in a previous era. The German General Staff had developed sophisticated communication protocols that balanced the need for tactical coordination with the imperatives of operational security, minimizing the risk of premature disclosure of German intentions to British interception forces. On the British side, preparations for what would become the Battle of Jutland reflected a fundamentally different strategic approach, based on maintaining naval superiority through force concentration and control of sea lines of communication. The Grand Fleet, under the command of Admiral Jellicoe, operated according to doctrines that prioritized the preservation of the existing numerical advantage while maintaining constant pressure on German capabilities for naval power projection. This strategic philosophy, although cautious, reflected a realistic understanding of the stakes involved. A decisive defeat of the Grand Fleet could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the war, potentially forcing Great Britain into peace negotiations under unfavorable conditions. British naval intelligence, largely based on the interception and decoding of German communications, had detected signs of an imminent German operation. The famous Room 40 of the British Admiralty, the Naval Intelligence Operations Centre that had managed to break the German naval codes, provided crucial information about the movements and intentions of the High Seas Fleet. This intelligence advantage, although significant, was tempered by limitations in the speed of transmission and analysis of information, as well as occasional communication failures between intelligence centers and operational forces at sea. The British response to the German threat manifested itself in an impressive mobilization of naval resources that demonstrated both the depth and flexibility of the British maritime war machine. Admiral Beatty's battlecruiser force, based in Rosyth, received orders to investigate and engage any detected German force, while the Grand Fleet began its sortie from Scapa Flow in a demonstration of naval power that would put to sea the largest concentration of naval firepower ever assembled under a single flag. This mobilization involved tens of thousands of sailors, hundreds of ships of all types, and complex logistics that tested the limits of British naval organizational capacity. The stage for the epic confrontation that would follow was thus set, with two of the most powerful fleets in naval history converging for an encounter that would determine not only the immediate outcome of the German operation, but the fate of world maritime dominance. The hours that followed would witness the climax of 2 decades of naval arms race and the last great confrontation of the dreadnought era, establishing strategic precedents whose consequences shaped the development of naval warfare in the subsequent decades. The third act of this naval epic unfolded in the choppy waters of the North Sea during the early afternoon hours of May 31st, when the reconnaissance forces of both fleets established the first visual contact that would trigger the largest naval battle of the First World War. The initial encounter between the light cruisers HMS Galatea and SMS Elbing, seemingly casual but foreseen by the tactical doctrines of both sides, marked the beginning of a sequence of events that would culminate in the direct confrontation between the main battle fleets of the world's 2 largest naval powers. The escalation of the engagement followed a pattern that reflected the naval doctrines carefully developed by both commands. Admiral Beatty, commanding the British battlecruiser force from his flagship HMS Lion, responded to reports of enemy contact with a tactical decision that demonstrated both courage and confidence in the superiority of his forces. The British formation, composed of the battle cruisers Lion, Princess Royal, Queen Mary, and Tiger, represented a formidable concentration of naval firepower, supplemented by the 5th Battle Squadron under the command of Rear Admiral Hugh Evan Thomas, including the modern fast battleships Barham, Valiant, Warspite, and Malaya. The initial approach of the rival forces immediately revealed the fundamental differences in naval design philosophies that had guided the two navies during the preceding decade. The British battle cruisers, prioritizing speed and firepower over protection, contrasted sharply with their German equivalents, which incorporated a more conservative balance between offensive capability and defensive resilience. This philosophical difference, seemingly technical, would have profound tactical consequences when the main guns began to thunder across the cold waters of the North Sea. Admiral Hipper, commanding the German 1st Reconnaissance Group from the Lützow, demonstrated the tactical mastery that had established him as one of the most respected naval commanders of his generation. Upon detecting the approach of Beatty's force, Hipper implemented precisely the German strategic plan, initiating a calculated withdrawal aimed at luring the British battlecruisers within range of the main German battle line. This seemingly defensive maneuver, in reality, represented the execution of a sophisticated naval trap that exploited Beatty's known aggressiveness and the geographical separation between the different components of the British naval force. The first exchange of fire occurred at 3:48 p.m. when the rival forces reached the effective range of their main guns at a distance of approximately 18,500 yards. This historical moment marked the beginning of the largest naval artillery duel of the Dreadnought era, with dozens of large-caliber guns pouring shells weighing hundreds of kilograms across the space separating the engaged formations. The initial accuracy of both sides reflected years of intensive training and technical improvements in fire control systems, although atmospheric conditions and the characteristic fog of the North Sea created significant challenges for observation and fire correction. The initial superiority of the German artillery became apparent in the first minutes of the engagement, when accurate shells began to hit the British battlecruisers with devastating effects. HMS Indefatigable, hit by a coordinated salvo from the German guns, suffered a catastrophic explosion that resulted in the total loss of the ship and virtually its entire crew in a terrible spectacle that demonstrated the inherent vulnerability of the British battlecruiser design. This tragedy, witnessed by hundreds of sailors on both sides, immediately established the lethal stakes of the confrontation and the brutal reality of modern naval warfare. The British response to this devastating loss demonstrated both the discipline and the determination that characterized the Royal Navy in its most critical moments. Beatty, far from retreating in the face of the German lethality display, maintained his close-quarters formation, while seeking opportunities to exploit temporary numerical advantages and superior characteristics of his ships in specific aspects. The arrival of the 5th Battle Squadron within effective combat range significantly altered the dynamics of the engagement, introducing into the battle 4 of the Royal Navy's most modern and powerful warships, each armed with 8 15-inch guns capable of penetrating any contemporary naval armor. The participation of the 5th Battle Squadron in the initial phase of the combat demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of tactical coordination in an era before modern communications. The 4 fast battleships, although individually superior to any German ship in terms of pure firepower, operated under communication and coordination restrictions that limited their collective effectiveness. Beatty's orders, transmitted via visual signals vulnerable to the prevailing atmospheric conditions, did not always reach Evan Thomas with the clarity and speed necessary for optimal exploitation of the tactical opportunities that arose. The evolution of the combat during this initial phase revealed the complexities inherent in the command and control of large naval formations under conditions of intense combat. The need to maintain formation while engaging moving targets, coordinating movement, communications, and fire control simultaneously tested the limits of available human and technical capabilities. Commanders on both sides faced the challenge of rapidly processing changing tactical information while making decisions that could determine not only the outcome of the immediate battle, but the destiny of their nations in the broader war. The increasing intensity of the mutual bombardment created combat conditions that surpassed previous experiences of naval warfare. The volume of fire poured by dozens of large-caliber guns, combined with the smoke and debris resulting from the impacts, created a battle environment that challenged both navigation and effective observation. Under these conditions, the quality of individual training and the cohesion of the crews became decisive factors that often outweighed purely material technical advantages. The second catastrophic British loss, when HMS Queen Mary exploded after receiving several direct hits, again demonstrated the fundamental vulnerability of the British battlecruiser design when confronted with accurate German artillery. This second tragedy, occurring within an hour of the first, forced a tactical re-evaluation by Beatty that recognized the need to modify his approach to combat to preserve his remaining forces while maintaining pressure on the enemy. The crucial moment of this phase of the battle arrived when the approach of the main German battle line became visible on the southern horizon, confirming that the German operation had succeeded in luring a significant portion of the British naval force into the carefully prepared trap. The identification of this massive threat forced Beatty into a fundamental tactical decision that would determine not only his own survival, but the subsequent course of the entire battle. The reversal of course of the British force, executed under intense enemy fire, represented both a necessary tactical retreat and the beginning of the second phase of the Battle of Jutland, when the retreating British forces would lead the German High Seas Fleet directly to the encounter with Jellicoe's Grand Fleet. The fourth movement of this symphony of iron and fire began when the tactical retreat of Beatty's force turned into a desperate race to establish contact with the Grand Fleet before the German High Seas Fleet could complete the destruction of the British battlecruisers. This phase of the battle, characterized by combat in motion at maximum speeds across choppy seas, tested both the technical capabilities of the ships involved and the physical and mental resilience of their crews. The German pursuit, led by Hipper's battlecruisers supported by the fastest battleships of Scheer's battle line, maintained constant pressure on the retreating British forces through long-range bombardment that continued to cause significant damage. The performance of the 5th Battle Squadron during this retreat under fire demonstrated the exceptional quality of both the ships and their crews. Operating as the rearguard of the British formation, the 4 fast battleships faced virtually the entire German High Seas Fleet in a display of courage and professional competence that would become legendary in naval history. HMS Warspite, in particular, suffered steering damage that caused it to circle involuntarily near the German line, drawing the concentrated fire of multiple German battleships in an experience that tested the limits of resistance of any contemporary warship. The arrival of the first units of the Grand Fleet at the theatre of operations marked a fundamental transformation in the nature of the battle, from an engagement between light forces and cruisers to the direct confrontation between the main battle lines of the world's 2 largest fleets. The approach of Jellicoe's force, initially detected through distant visual signals and confirmed by reconnaissance reports, forced a strategic re-evaluation by the German command that recognized the radical change in the developing balance of forces. Admiral Jellicoe faced at this moment one of the most complex tactical decisions in naval history, having to form his battle line from multiple squadrons converging from different directions while the enemy approached under conditions of limited visibility. The formation of the battle line from the cruising formation, an extremely complex naval maneuver, even under ideal conditions, became exponentially more difficult under the pressure of imminent combat and with incomplete information about the exact position and strength of the enemy. The execution of this critical maneuver demonstrated both the professional competence and the intensive training that characterized the Grand Fleet. The transformation of 6 columns of battleships into a single battle line more than 5 miles long, performed under extreme temporal pressure and with limited communications, represented one of the most impressive examples of naval command and control in the modern era. The precision of this evolution, allowing 24 battleships to assume their designated positions in a coordinated combat formation, reflected years of exercises and a deep understanding of naval tactical doctrines. The gradual revelation of the magnitude of the concentrated British force had a profound psychological impact on the German command, which was faced with a tactical situation fundamentally different from the one it had planned for. The sight of multiple columns of British battleships emerging through the mist and smoke represented the materialization of British naval numerical superiority on a scale that rendered any possibility of a German victory in a prolonged frontal battle questionable. The first exchange of fire between the main battle lines occurred on a scale that eclipsed all previous naval engagements in history. When more than 40 battleships opened fire simultaneously, the deafening roar of heavy artillery and the massive columns of water raised by the shells that missed the target created a spectacle of destructive power that transcended previous human experience. The intensity of this mutual bombardment, with hundreds of large-caliber shells crossing the space between the rival formations every minute, established combat conditions that tested the limits of both naval technology and human endurance. British numerical superiority began to manifest itself through the ability to concentrate fire from multiple ships onto individual German targets, creating a tactical advantage that compensated for any individual qualitative superiority of the German ships. The British naval doctrine of force concentration, developed through centuries of maritime experience, demonstrated its validity when applied to the realities of modern naval warfare. The German battleships, although individually superior in some technical aspects, faced the inevitable mathematical reality that even the best armor and damage control had limits when subjected to the volume of fire that the Grand Fleet could concentrate. Admiral Scheer's critical decision to execute a battle turn away represented both a demonstration of tactical mastery and a realistic recognition of the strategic limitations of the German position. This complex maneuver, requiring the entire German battle line to simultaneously reverse its direction of movement, was one of the most difficult in naval doctrine and extremely dangerous when executed under intense enemy fire. The success of this evolution demonstrated both the quality of German training and Scheer's skill as a naval commander. The successful execution of this tactical retreat allowed the High Seas Fleet to escape the trap that its own strategy had created, but at the cost of renouncing any possibility of a decisive victory in the battle. The subsequent British pursuit, although limited by considerations of strategic prudence, maintained pressure on the retreating German force and resulted in additional engagements that caused substantial damage to both sides. The fifth act of this naval epic unfolded during the twilight and early evening hours, when decreasing visibility conditions created opportunities for chaotic engagements between isolated units of the rival fleets. This phase of the battle, characterized by a series of confused and often poorly coordinated confrontations, demonstrated both the limitations of contemporary communication technology and the importance of individual initiative and professional competence in ambiguous tactical situations. Jellicoe's controversial decision to avoid a generalized night engagement reflected a sober understanding of the strategic stakes involved and the technical limitations of night naval warfare in the pre-radar era. British naval doctrine, developed through secular experience, recognized that night fighting tended to favor numerically inferior forces through confusion and opportunities for coordinated torpedo attacks. The preservation of the Grand Fleet, as an instrument of long-term maritime control, weighed more heavily in Jellicoe's strategic consideration than the immediate tactical possibilities of inflicting additional damage on the German force. During the following night hours, a series of engagements between destroyers, light cruisers, and isolated units of the main fleets created a confused sequence of combats that cost additional losses to both sides without decisively resolving the strategic outcome of the battle. These nocturnal confrontations, although individually dramatic and often heroic, demonstrated the inherent difficulties in the command and control of complex naval operations during periods of limited visibility. The successful escape of most of the High Seas Fleet through the German defensive minefields during the early hours of June 1st represented both a tactical success for the German command and a missed opportunity for the Royal Navy. The German ability to navigate safely through their own mined defenses while denying this same ability to the British pursuers demonstrated the importance of local geography and defensive preparation in naval strategy. The dawn of June 1st revealed a North Sea empty of German ships, with the High Seas Fleet having safely reached the protection of its continental bases. The Grand Fleet, although tactically and numerically victorious in the direct engagement, faced the reality that its main adversary had escaped total destruction and maintained its capacity to challenge British maritime control in future engagements. The immediate analysis of the battle results revealed a complex pattern of victory and defeat that defied simplistic interpretations. From a purely tactical perspective, the High Seas Fleet had inflicted heavier losses on the Royal Navy, sinking 3 battlecruisers and 3 armoured cruisers against its own losses of 1 battleship and 1 battlecruiser. This advantage in terms of ships sunk and human casualties provided substantial material for German propaganda claims of victory. However, the strategic assessment painted a fundamentally different picture. The High Seas Fleet, although having survived the confrontation, had failed to achieve any of the strategic objectives that motivated the operation. The British naval blockade remained intact, the numerical superiority of the Grand Fleet was preserved, and the German capacity to challenge British maritime control had not been materially improved. More significantly, the confrontation had demonstrated that even under favorable tactical conditions, the High Seas Fleet lacked the real capacity to decisively defeat the Grand Fleet in a frontal battle. The psychological impact of the battle on both naval commands would be profound and lasting. The Royal Navy, accustomed to decisive naval victories in the tradition of Trafalgar, faced the disturbing reality that numerical superiority and naval tradition did not automatically guarantee tactical victory against a well-prepared and competently commanded adversary. The closeness with which several important units had come to total destruction and the significant losses actually suffered forced a fundamental re-evaluation of British tactical doctrines and naval designs. For the Imperial German Navy, the battle represented simultaneously a validation of German tactical capabilities and a demonstration of the fundamental strategic limitations imposed by numerical inferiority. The superior quality of German artillery, damage control, and training had been clearly demonstrated, but within a context that made it clear that these tactical advantages could not overcome the broader strategic realities of the naval conflict. The 6th and final movement of this naval symphony manifested itself not in the stormy waters of the North Sea, but in the meeting rooms of the rival admiralties and the political centres of power in London and Berlin, where the strategic implications of the Battle of Jutland were analysed and its lessons incorporated into the naval doctrines that would shape the rest of the war and the subsequent decades. The post-battle assessment revealed a series of technical, tactical, and strategic issues that would profoundly influence the development of modern naval warfare and establish precedents that would extend far beyond the immediate context of the First World War. The detailed technical analysis of the damage suffered by both sides provided crucial insights into the relative effectiveness of different naval design philosophies and tactical doctrines. The British battlecruisers, conceived according to Fisher's theory that speed is armour, had demonstrated catastrophic vulnerabilities when subjected to accurate German fire at relatively close ranges. The devastating explosions that destroyed HMS Indefatigable and HMS Queen Mary forced a fundamental re-evaluation of the principles that had guided British naval design during the preceding decade. Subsequent investigations revealed systemic deficiencies in ammunition, handling procedures, and magazine design that had transformed apparent advantages into lethal vulnerabilities. The British practice of keeping magazine doors open and accumulating propellant charges in unprotected areas to maximize the rate of fire had created ideal conditions for the spread of catastrophic explosions. These findings forced extensive modifications to operational procedures and naval designs that would influence all world navies in the following decades. Paradoxically, the apparent superiority of German metallurgy and engineering, although real in many aspects, masked fundamental strategic limitations that the battle had made clear. The German ability to produce individually superior ships in many technical aspects could not overcome the realities of limited industrial capacity and restricted material resources that fundamentally limited the size of the High Seas Fleet. The superior quality of German designs was, in part, a necessary response to the impossibility of competing numerically with British naval production. The re-evaluation of tactical doctrines revealed significant limitations in communications and coordination that had hampered the effectiveness of both fleets during critical aspects of the battle. The reliance on visual signals and primitive radio communications had created situations where experienced and competent commanders operated with incomplete or contradictory information about the developing tactical situation. These limitations forced an accelerated development of naval communication technologies that would profoundly influence the evolution of maritime warfare. The most significant strategic impact of the battle manifested itself in the confirmation that the British naval blockade remained the most effective strategy for defeating Germany in a prolonged war. The inability of the High Seas Fleet to break this blockade, even when operating under relatively favorable tactical conditions, demonstrated that British naval supremacy, although not absolute in tactical terms, maintained its fundamental strategic validity. This realization reinforced the German determination to explore alternatives such as unrestricted submarine warfare, with consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate naval context. The influence of the Battle of Jutland on the subsequent development of naval doctrine extended far beyond the immediate belligerent powers. Naval observers from neutral and smaller Allied powers intensively studied the battle reports and analyses, extracting lessons that would influence their own naval programs and tactical doctrines. The recognition that even the largest battle fleets were vulnerable to catastrophic losses in direct engagements accelerated the development of doctrines that emphasized tactical flexibility and the use of emerging technologies such as naval aviation and submarine warfare. The battle also catalyzed important developments in fire control technology and naval communications that would transform the nature of maritime warfare in the following decades. The recognition that firing accuracy was often more important than fire volume forced substantial investments in analog computing systems and observation instruments that would dramatically improve the effectiveness of naval artillery. Simultaneously, the limitations revealed in naval communication systems stimulated research that would lead to fundamental advances in naval radio technology. The enduring legacy of the Battle of Jutland extends far beyond its immediate consequences in the First World War. As the last great confrontation of the dreadnought era, the battle marked the end of an epoch in naval warfare and established precedents that would influence the development of maritime strategy until the contemporary era. The lessons drawn about command and control, force coordination, the importance of naval intelligence and the limitations of purely material superiority remained relevant through subsequent technological transformations. The retrospective analysis of the battle also revealed fundamental insights into the nature of naval strategy in prolonged conflicts between great powers. The confirmation that maritime control could be maintained through strategies that avoided direct, decisive confrontations profoundly influenced naval strategic thinking in the following decades. This understanding contributed to the development of doctrines that emphasized strategic flexibility and the use of multiple dimensions of naval power instead of exclusive reliance on supremacy in frontal battles. The Battle of Jutland remains, therefore, a landmark in the evolution of naval warfare, representing simultaneously the zenith and the end of the era of great confrontations between fleets of the line. Its lessons continued to influence naval strategists through the technological transformations that brought naval aviation, radar, guided missiles, and electronic warfare, demonstrating that certain fundamental principles of maritime strategy transcend specific technological changes. The epic confrontation between the Grand Fleet and the High Seas Fleet in the North Sea remains as an enduring testament to the courage, professional competence, and sacrifice of the navies that participated in the last great duel of the dreadnought era, establishing a legacy that continues to influence contemporary naval strategic thinking.